The idea was not to make you so comfortable. The idea was to leave you a little disturbed by what we do to people who have chosen to speak the truth despite all odds. And that happened then, that's happening now, that's happening everywhere. And so what made me choose was actually what's happening in the world today. And I think it was deeply troubling me, and in some ways when I read Manto and about Manto, I first read Manto in college, but only his short stories. And in some ways I rediscovered Manto in 2012, which was his centenary celebration. And as we know, when there's a centenary year, then a lot of media focuses on it. There was lots written about Manto. His essays were translated. For the first time I read his essays and got to know the man behind the writing. And I realized that so much of what he fought for, his own concerns, resonated deeply with mine and many of us. And I felt in some way, by telling Manto's stories, it would give me a way to respond to what is happening around us. And that's the reason I picked this particular story. I was almost I was looking for something, not even consciously, because I didn't pick this story. I don't feel like I said, okay, I'm looking for a script and let me do this film. It wasn't that at all. Both Firak and Manto were almost sort of a compulsion. I wanted to say something, this story somehow came to me. As Manto says, if I can just say it in Hindi and I'll translate it because it's beautifully said, and those of you who understand. Manto said, "मैं अफसाना नहीं लिखता, अफसाना मुझे लिखता है." I don't write stories, stories write me. And in some ways, both my films, that's been the process, and that's why I chose to tell this story. And I also felt through this story we can talk about the many Mantos who are there today. We can also spread Mantoyat. That's a word that Manto had also written in one of his essays, which I have kind of owned now, and I feel like through this film, if we can spread that Mantoyat, and by Mantoyat I mean that will to be more honest, be more courageous, and be more free-spirited. If you can, and we can take a little bit of that from Manto, which we all need, then I think the film does what it's intended to do.
You mentioned Firak. For those of you who have not seen Firak, how many have seen Firak? Okay, quite a few, but not a lot of people. For those who haven't seen Firak, it was Nandita's first film as a director. And it was about it's a story set in Gujarat just after the 2002 riots that happened at the time. Tell us a little about that, Nandita, since we're on Firak. Tell us about, you've been an actor, what led you to direction and especially picking up a subject as difficult and as contentious as a story about riots? And
to be honest, if I had picked up, I wouldn't have picked up Firak as my first film and Manto as my second. So it wasn't, again, a very conscious choice. Gujarat riots happened in 2002. I was deeply troubled by how our society, our conversations were getting polarized and divided. And I started doing a series of talks in schools and colleges and other social forums, and I called it Identity and the Notion of the Other. And even those conversations were getting so polarized. There was so much of us and them. So it wasn't so much about what only happened in Gujarat, but among my friends, people I knew, and that was very disturbing. And that's how, from one story, it slowly organically became an ensemble film, which is the aftermath of the Gujarat riots. I, as a viewer, have never really enjoyed seeing films where there is violence. I feel sometimes violence is glorified even when the intention is not true, but it's just done so fantastically that it can be very enticing. Violence is normalized, and in times such as ours, I don't know, maybe it's a factor of age, but the older I'm getting, I want to run away from anything that, even in the smallest way, justifies violence. And that's why I chose to set Firak a month after the riots, and about the lingering impact of violence. how does it impact relationships? What happens to people who are the victims of it, those who are the perpetrators, guilt, idealism or the fading of it, and just emptiness that people face once their loved ones are gone, and what do they do next, and all of that. And it's been 10 years since I haven't, the next film was 10 years later this year. And again, it wasn't distributed well, the story didn't beat, that's why maybe a few of you have seen, and I thought I was never going to do a film again. And again with Manto, I felt compelled to tell this story. By the way, Firak is on Netflix and Amazon, and pirated one on YouTube, which is a good copy, and now you can watch it. As long as you don't pirate Manto yet.
Both your films, in many ways, are you responding to a moment in time, so to speak, and about where we are as a people. Manto particularly is, he's by virtue of the fact that he belongs in a sense to both sides of the border, really, He is not necessarily only a Pakistani writer. He is, India completely claims him also as an Indian writer. He transcends all kinds of borders and boundaries. He's a bit of a transgressor all his life, and his literature remains transgressive. To compress a life and a body of work like that into 2 hours is extremely difficult. So what made you choose these particular years of his life, and what did you choose to leave out, and what did you choose to keep in the film?
Yeah, that was one of the most difficult things, because all the research was primarily based on his own writing. And it was huge because he was a very prolific writer. He died very young, at 42, as you saw in the film. But he wrote 300 short stories, hundreds of essays, hundreds of radio plays, biographical sketches. I mean, how much do you read? And the more you read, and there's so many wonderful anecdotes, and you want to have it all. My first draft was a 10-year story. It was from 1942 to 52. And with every draft, it kept getting narrower. And I also realized there were lots of people who don't know Manto at all. So the deeper I was getting into Manto, there were these little nuggets that I wanted to share, and then I knew that 90% of the audience will probably not even know who Manto was. And there will be some, because there are Manto experts who know everything and much more than I can ever know. And in a way it's also for them, because they will see their Manto and they will all come with their own interpretation maybe. And then there are those who know a little bit about it. So it was a very challenging experience. But I think filmmaking, especially this one, also has been a very spiritual experience for me. Because just this whole idea of letting go. When you're writing, and what you let go, and hopefully what I've kept is more interesting than what I've let go. And but that was a very difficult process. I finally narrowed it to the 4 most significant years in Manto's life, which is 46 to 50, and also the most significant years in the lives of India and Pakistan because of the partition. And you absolutely rightly said that Manto belongs to both countries. In fact, it's really ironical because in Pakistan, when they write about him, they say one of the greatest short story Pakistani writers. And in India, we call him, the greatest short story writers, Indian short story writers. And it would be such a disservice to Manto because he was one person who wanted to go beyond these binaries, these kind of identities of nationality, of religion, of all of these identities that are dividing us. He was totally against this us and them. So, a lot of his stories talk about that universal human experience. It talks about how there are grey shades in every one of us. That let's not make these black and white distinctions. And every good person, or the ones we think are fantastic, they have their shadows. And the worst of people can be redeemed. And that's what he explores. So his were really human stories. So in that sense, it was really tough, but I chose these 4 years. And also when you're doing a project like this, you're not a trained filmmaker. You're doing it because you deeply feel compelled to tell this story. In some ways, you also don't have a fear of failure because you don't know what's really going to come out. You don't know who's going to relate to it, who's not going to relate to it. I was just telling inside when we were talking, they said, you want to go and see how the reaction is? I said, it's like a baby has been delivered. The only time I've seen it is in Cannes when we had our world premiere with my cast and crew. After that, I have not seen any screenings. Every time I see, I only find mistakes and faults and, I wish I'd done that and I wish I'd done that. So it's just now, And all of you will take from it maybe something else. And usually whether you read, and more so in a film, when you watch a film, and when people come and tell me how they felt, and the response has been overwhelming in India and other parts, and they tell me so much about themselves. And that's what art does, it sort of almost transfers that. That's why it's also a very empathy-invoking experience, because you almost feel like the character, you almost sort of juxtapose your own experiences, your own thoughts, your own responses to things. So what has been fascinating for me has been just reading and hearing what people have taken from it. And different people have taken different things, but at the end, I think they have felt great empathy for Manto, but equal empathy for the wife. And also disturbed about what's happening today, and they are being able to make that parallel that you started your conversation with, about what's happening today and what happened then, and how little has changed. We probably regressed. He could still say a lot more things that maybe we can't say today.
Tell me a little about recreation. You've talked about the letting go, but also recreating a world that is mostly gone, especially visually. I mean, when you write, you can do that, but visually, the buildings have changed, the decor, the architecture of the time, and you've captured all of that really beautifully. So how did you do that? And also, what were the difficulties and challenges? You said you couldn't shoot in Lahore. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that was the other most difficult thing. Because today's modern day clutter, where buildings have ACs jutting out, satellite dishes, hoardings, many of those old beautiful buildings are dilapidated. The nicely preserved beautiful ones, they don't want to give it for shooting, or they want to give it at a cost that we can't afford. So before I had even a penny as investment, I had started doing the research. So it's been a 6-year labor of love. So I had started researching with a very small team, just with one assistant, through the internet, through libraries. So we had lots and lots of photographs. I'd done many recce's. There's a person in Bombay called Rafiq Baghdadi who does Manto walks. So he takes you through the by-lanes where he lived, where his Swachuktai lived, where he had his coffee, or where he went for his kebabs. So we did all those walks and saw a part of Bombay that I don't think I would have ever seen otherwise. But it was really difficult to recreate Bombay. I was very keen to shoot in Lahore, and I had gone and researched there as well and done the recce, had a crew there. And then Indo-Pak, as we always do, 2 steps forward and 3 steps backwards. And it was one of those times where Pakistani actors were not allowed to come and shoot in India. And so I had to find a Lahore in India. So I went to 5 different cities, and I'm really finicky, as a viewer also when I watch, and I don't find the context really right. It really bothers me. The context should not be overwhelming, but just enough to transport you to that time and place. And then you can be with the characters and forget about production design and camera work and all of that. But I went to 5 different cities, and finally, the irony is that we found it in Gujarat. Firak, which was set in Gujarat, we didn't want to shoot there because we didn't want to be martyrs, we wanted to make the film. So we had gone to old Hyderabad city. And ironically, we found our Lahore in Gujarat, in a small town. And in fact, the villagers were very, very supportive. And I took a lot of photographs and I sent it to someone I know well in Lahore. And I said, can you tell me if this would look like 40s Lahore? And he, who's been a great supporter and has helped me with many things in the script, who I hadn't met yet. Just by email, somebody had written to me, I responded, and for 2-3 years we were in touch and he was helping me. Saeed Ahmed, he was a gentleman from Lahore. He gave it to an architect in Lahore, a senior architect, and said, these are photographs of places of Lahore, now tell me where they are. And that gentleman actually wrote saying, this is this mohalla, this is this place, behind this house. It was incredible when he sent me back that email, that these are these places. It took me, I took a double take, I'm like, what's he talking about? Didn't he understand these are photographs of Gujarat? And then I immediately called him up and he said, हाँ, मैंने बड़ी चालाकी की. I was very clever. You know what I did? I sent it to him saying it's Lahore. So I think that was really good that it does look, in fact it was easier, much easier to shoot there. We even had rooms and lanes that, it was like a ghost town, it was an NRI, as we call it, non-resident Indian town, because most of them would live in the US and would only come during the summer holidays. So there were no ACs and all of that jutting out, not too many satellite dishes. Old town. They had some rooms which even had the switchboards of the 40s and 50s and the kind of furniture and the books. So lot of the Lahore was shot there, and yeah, so I think we sort of passed the litmus test on that.
I think for those of us who have been to each other's countries, I think this is one of the greatest tragedies, because you see how little difference there is. Our shared history is not only strong, but also the commonalities are so strong. Like Karachi is so much like Bombay, Lahore is so much like Delhi. Yes. This is really the thing about Manto too.
Dhaka like Kolkata?
No.
I think except for the Bangla, it's a lot like Bombay actually.
No.
Yeah. I think what I was trying to say about Manto was that he was also, in that sense, his work has a universal undying appeal. The work itself. Would you comment on his literature and how it survived and been regenerated, and how every generation continues to find him relevant?
Yeah. I think he was very, very modern in his own time, in the way he looked at characters, the kind of agency he gave to women. In the stories about sex workers, it wasn't just empathy, or it was really an understanding of the human condition. It was the understanding of how a woman would feel. In fact, someone asked him, another writer from Pakistan, the person who, Ahmed Nadeem Kazmi, who was also a great writer, who you see in the bar, who kind of betrays his trust. And he asked him, he said, how do you understand women? आप कैसे समझ लेते हैं औरतों को? So Manto said, औरत को समझने के लिए खुद औरत बन जाना पड़ता है. You have to become a woman yourself. And that's, I think, for a man to say that you have to become, you have to literally be that person to be able to write. Also his partition work. I mean, there are many partition stories. Many writers have written about partition. And it was, as we know, the largest mass migration in the history of the world. And yet his stories have never been epic. They've been very intimate. The lens is very personal. It's about 2-3 people. And you can change their religious identity and nothing would change. You can swap them. There's that universality about his stories, and they're very real, and that's why even today when we read that, we can completely relate to it. In fact, his partition, that was the only time he wasn't prolific, during partition, because he was so deeply troubled by it. You have to be very, very sensitive, because we all care about what's happening everywhere, what's happening around us, but the fact is we do go on with our lives. We still, we talk about it, we get angry about it, we write about it, we share our thoughts, but still our life goes on. His life didn't go on. In fact, his alcoholism was largely because of the kind of depression he went through. And then when he fought it back and he felt that there was a sort of a redemptive power in his writing, and he went back to writing, some of his greatest partition stories were written after partition. Even some of his Bombay stories were written reminiscing about Bombay. So I think he kept his lens close, and that's what I have tried to do. In fact, the lens gets closer and closer as you go to him, because in Bombay is also a character. You get a sense of Bombay. You don't get as much a sense of the city of Lahore, because it wasn't so much about Lahore. It was really, as you get closer into the film, it's really about him. So I've also tried to keep the lens, and that's why I wanted to intersperse the stories. Because imagine if I did a film about a musician and didn't make you hear the music of that person. You would say, how do I know he was such a great musician? And similarly, I felt that it was really important to give you a glimpse of his stories, because it's very difficult to get into the head of a writer. And that's why probably not enough films have been made about writers. In India, only in an interview when the release was approaching, that an interviewer said, "Did you know this is the first film about an Indian writer?" And I was like, "Really? I never thought about it." And then thinking about it, I realized actually it was the second. The first one was written by Manto, called Mirza Ghalib, which was in 1955 when he was in Lahore, and in fact it was the first film that got a national award, and he wasn't, of course he wasn't there because he never went back, and he was in a very bad condition. That's the year he died. You keep seeing those images of a writer's journey. How do you get inside the head? So the stories were important to know the writer behind the man, and therefore, you know, they're kind of together. His life and work were not different, like I think many of our lives. And that's why it was really important to intersperse. And also in Manto's work, the line between fact and fiction are very blurred. You almost don't know whether this really happened to him, or is it a character that he saw, or has he created it? He uses the same words, the same names in different stories. Sometimes for a man, unisex names like Mumtaz comes in a couple of his stories. This whole incident of Shyam, the perception of his betrayal, betraying Manto, nobody really knows why he went to Lahore. These are all inferences. But the fact that he wrote a biographical sketch on Shyam called Murli Ki Dhun, in which he describes this whole incident. And again he writes a story called Sahai, where all the characters' names have changed. And Shyam's character itself is 3 different people. So, you know, like a composite character, but divided characters that he's written. And he's writing about the same incident. So obviously it must have impacted him so deeply for him to write 2 different pieces, one a fiction and one a non-fiction, about the same incident. Though a lot of the lines, I mean 90% of the dialogue or 80% of the dialogue are his own, you know, taken from various writings and something from another story that's not even there in the film, but one line from there. So it's been very tough in a way. You almost have to know the person inside out in a way, and that's why even my own dialogues that I have written, I kind of feel that he'll forgive me for it. Because one of the interviews said, oh, I love that line where he says that, you know, in the train when they're sitting, and he says that you know, killing one person, everyone's life matters. It's not just one person's life. It's just suddenly slipping my, sabki zindagi ahem hai. You know, it's everyone's life matters, it's not just one person. Sorry, I'm forgetting the exact line. But something like that this person quoted, and I said, I'm sorry, that was my line. Attributed to Manto. Or when he says that he touches his wife's stomach and says, tells the unborn child, कि तुम एक आज़ाद हिंदुस्तान में पैदा होगे, that you will be born in a free India. But again, wasn't his, because I don't know what they really talked. In fact, it was more difficult to create Safiya's character, because about Manto there was so much written. When I went and met the family, by the way, that was definitely part of the research, to go and meet the family, the daughters. But the eldest daughter was 9 years old, 9, 7 and 5, and they had very faint memories. Their memories was that father was wonderful, he would tell us stories, very generous. They had really good memories. It was only through his sister-in-law, Safiya's sister, Zakia, who was also featured in the film, that I got to know about them. And every time I would ask about Safiya, they would say, oh, she was such a soft-spoken, such a lovely person, very supportive. I had to really dig to say, but sometimes she must have been tired of it. Wasn't there a fatigue? And how did she cope with it? And what did she say? And one of them, like the sister-in-law, in fact, said that she had this eczema in the last 2-3 years of her life. She didn't know why, and she kept ignoring it. And after he died, it got cured after a month. So she was so stressed out, and you know, it just probably manifested in this skin disease. And I just brought some elements of that to show that, you know, how she was kind of internalizing that stress. And maybe I made Safiya a little more feisty than she really was. But you know, after all, there's a lot of me in that film as well, and how I see relationships. And I think it's also important to we talk about these great writers and artists, but what do their families go through? What do their wives go through? I think that's also equally important.
Actually, that was one of the nicer things about Manto. I think it restored Safiya in some way, and I think it also gave Manto a lot of dignity. I think in popular sort of narratives about Manto, we all love Manto's literature and stories, But when we think about the man himself, we don't necessarily treat him with a sense of dignity and his struggles with alcoholism also. I think your film deals with it with a lot of dignity.
And yet contradictions. Because usually when you tend to do these biopics, first of all, that suddenly becomes the flavor of the season. And when I started working, I didn't think of it even as a biopic, and it was in 2012. Usually the trajectory is always like an ordinary man goes through something extraordinary and becomes this extraordinary sportsman or an extraordinary politician or an extraordinary artist, whatever it may be. But Manto was so riddled with so many contradictions, and in his own work, he talks about contradictions in human beings. He doesn't aspire for beauty. He wants to show that ugliness as well. He said that's reality. Whatever is reality, I want to show that. And why can't we show things as they are? Going away from reality, is that going to make us better human beings? So I think he would have been fine. In fact, he would have been very upset with me if I had only shown him or put him on a pedestal. And sometimes there are people who have come to me and say, oh, I really didn't like Manto. I mean, what kind of a person he was. And that shows their discomfort maybe with ambiguity, or their own discomfort with contradictions, or us wanting to sort of put people on pedestal. And then there are people who feel that, okay, he was fallible, he was like us, he had good and bad, and through all of that, through his ego, through his arrogance, through his alcoholism, his pure intent of wanting to tell the truth, wanting to tell things as they are, despite all odds. The fact that he was so compelled to write kept putting him in trouble. And yet he was a family man, as we say. Unlike many other maybe writers who have had their muses and history has forgiven them, but he cared about his family, and which was in direct conflict with his compulsion to write and drink. But I think people understand contradiction. Sometimes we oversimplify in films that, oh, it's a 2-hour film, I need to tell you there's a good guy and there's a bad guy. We undermine the audience, but I think most people do see through all of those difficulties and things that make us uncomfortable. We don't want to be so righteous and moralistic, because we aren't also good. We have our own contradictions. It makes us, in fact, love ourselves better and therefore the others, more forgiving of the others when we understand that yes, it's this and that. So right from the beginning, I always knew I wanted to not sort of beautify him in any which way. And that's why for me, the biggest nervousness was when I brought the daughters to India. I wanted them to see this premiere together, both Delhi and Bombay. And I brought Saeed Ahmed, who had also helped me. And when these people came, and my biggest worry was, how are the daughters going to take it? How are they going to see their parents, their father and their mother? And that was the most overwhelming moment when they came out and they were sobbing, and they said, we suddenly felt that we were back in history because we were too small. We felt like we could actually go back in time, and like we saw our parents for the first time. So for that reaction, I think I was really overwhelmed.
I think what you said about that was really interesting, because also Manto was finally about truth, and there was, in fact, I was listening to one of the letters that he had written, and Isma Chuttai had written about her brother, Khaka, a pen sketch, which he called Dozakhi, about Azim Beg Chuttai, which is very, it says many unpleasant things about him. The fact that he was an unpleasant man. And there's this little anecdote about Manto here, where Manto's sister tells Manto that, how could she have written such a thing? The man is dead, and she's saying all these awful things about her brother. And Manto tells his sister that if you could write something like this about me, I'd die today. That I want the truth to be written, even if it says awful things about me. I think he'd have been very happy to not be painted in rosy colors.
Ma'am, would you take questions from the audience?
Yes, we have plenty of time, don't worry. I am opening it up to questions now. If there are volunteers who are taking mics around, and maybe we can have a show of hands.
small question. Why did you choose Niazuddin Siddiqui as Manto? And was he a member of your research team, or did he do all the research on his own?
Yeah, well, Nawaz should have been here to answer. He's shooting in Kenya for Sacred Games. I had worked with Nawaz in Firak. That was his, in fact, first significant role, and it was my first film, so I've known him for 10 years. But like I said, I don't watch violent films, and he had done a lot of violent films, which I hadn't seen. I primarily thought of Nawaz because of his eyes. He's a good actor, there's no doubt about it, and he has a great range. But I think sometimes, beyond also acting, his eyes have a lived life kind of a feel, because he himself has struggled so much. And I really wanted to go close into Manto's face. And Manto, if you see his older photographs, he looks much older than his own age, at the age that he died in 42. So I wanted someone who could express that. And also Nawaz has a quality of melting into characters, where, the character is more important than the actor. Some actors are great, but you still remember the actor more. But I hope that when you saw the film, you were seeing Manto. And it's only in retrospect you say, yeah, Nawaz was brilliant in it. I first told him in 2013, and he told me that, oh, Manto, I would do anything for it, and I'd give 2 years of my life. And cut to, as we say in films, he became a big star, and he didn't have 2 years, not 2 months. He was doing Munna Michael, which is a completely different film along with Manto, or just one after the other. So he relied on my research. I don't think he, at the time, and it was difficult for him. But he's a natural actor, he's an instinctive actor. And I think it helps to be an actor-director, because you can communicate better, and especially when actors trust you. You can form a very good collaboration with actors. And I've enjoyed working with all the actors, and some have been very eminent. Even you've seen in small cameo roles, I just reached out to people because we want to make such films accessible. And I have suffered that even as an actor. I've done so many films that just don't get distributed. And you have a choice between doing films that you don't believe in, or it's not the kind of films that you feel comfortable, or do films that very few people are going to watch. And it's not an easy, it is a rock and a hard place kind of a situation. But yet you want to do films that you believe in, because I would be most uncomfortable doing things that, it's one life, you want to do things that you really care about. And if nothing else, at least those stories get documented. Because otherwise there would be no documentaries, there would be no short films. If we only think of what is the reach, because the reach will always be for mainstream cinema. So it's really that way been difficult, and that's why we got a host of actors who supported this film without taking any money, and they just said yes. Some I knew, some I didn't. Nawaz has taken 1 rupee for this film, as have the other actors. And I think we both really enjoy working together on this. I don't know where the mic is.
Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening.
First of all, I'm going to remember this session in 2 lines. There are no whites and black. We are all grey.
That is true. Yes.
Ma'am, my question is, in our times, when we live in times of Gauri Lankesh, Jamal Khashoggi, they are not letting us to tell the truth.
Yeah.
Making a film like Manto, such outspoken, out-blatant truths, how are we going to enforce that culture? I mean, there is freedom of speech, but there is no freedom of acceptance. People don't accept people who say such out-blatant truths.
Absolutely right.
You are in a platform where people listen to you. Like, you are an influential person. People listen to you. What are you going to do to make people accept the truths, outspoken truths that people say?
Well, you are saying it. That's why we are doing the film. Thank you. No, I'm saying it's a very important question that, we've all been talking about it, I'm sure, in various panels. All the directors of the festival also talked about freedom of expression, how important it is. Sadaf started by saying that the spaces, open spaces are shrinking, and it's happening everywhere in the world, right? That's why Martin Luther King said, in our times we will repent, not for the evil deeds of the bad, but for the silences of the good. And that is what is happening. We are remaining silent for too long. We are all trying to, and it's a tough battle, it's not easy. Do I speak up as much that tomorrow I'm going to be jailed or killed? Do I become a martyr? Or do I, feel that okay, with my little life, whatever little I can do I continue doing that? I also believe it is important to keep conversing, keep having those convictions. We all need each other. We are not in isolation. But when we are isolated, that's when we feel more disempowered. If everybody here cared about something and we all sort of stood up, protesting it, it would have far more strength than one or two people doing it, because we are all vulnerable. But I think through our films, through our books, after all, we are a product of all this, aren't we? You and I are a product of what we have read, the people we have met, the films we have watched. So the more we expose ourselves, the more we meet people who have strength and who open doors, and more we get inspired, and it's a rippling effect. And if we keep thinking someone else is going to fight that battle for us, it's not going to happen. We all have to fight our own battle for our sake and for everyone else's sake. So, I go through cynical days where I think, what's the point? Why do I even want to make a film? Who watches it? It doesn't create any revolutions. What does a film after all do? I'd rather just get onto the streets. But every one of us has a different role to play. Within that, can we be more courageous? Manto never saw himself as an activist. He was a writer. He felt, I should have the freedom to write what I want to write and speak my mind. What's wrong with that? All of us need that space. So I think it's a very valid point, but let's not be cynical. Cynical is for the lazy. We've got to be optimistic, we've got to be hopeful, we've got to keep doing things that we can do. Some women, please.
Maybe there can be women in guises.
Yes, absolutely. Gender fluidity, I'm all for it.
Yes.
Go for it.
Yeah, first of all, congratulations for making the film feel like. When I first heard that you were making this film, I read Manto when I was a kid. I actually stole 2 books from some of my uncles' library, thinking that would be something erotic. And I kept looking for it. And I remember this cold meat, Thanda Ghost. And I became Thanda today. And so I was envious that you chose I'm also a film maker, a lover. So I would like to know where you began the questions that more women need to come up. Yes, I have the question again. You have handled this subtle sexuality, perception issues very nicely, but still, I would say, being a woman, you also sort of like, as you said, to tell a story of a woman, you have to become woman. But I think you had to really work hard how you dealt that fact of Manto's. Because I could also see more of a man sometime, at least in the screen, to be frank. But I would have also loved to see more of a different man who is maybe also socially more woman.
There are many stories in the world. When you make one, it doesn't mean it's not the other. Like people ask me, why didn't you make a film on Ismat Chutkai? You're a woman director. Why not pick up a woman? Why did you choose a Pakistani writer? Why did you make a film on Prem Chand? We're always thinking, why this? Why not this? This is one film. There can be hundreds. You have so many stories here. Writers, artists, scientists, architects, people, social activists. There's no dearth of stories anywhere in the world, and definitely not in our subcontinent. So, it's not, one is not against the other.
There's a lady over there. Yeah. Would the mic go there?
মাইকটা একটু মাঝখানে রাখলে ভালো হতো, easier to and ওপরে আছে মাইক ওখানে নাই না
Is there a
ওদেরকে
mic
ইগনোর করবেন না
upstairs? Can someone take the mic upstairs?
বা জোরে বললেও শোনা যাবে somebody will translate it, or and feel free to ask the question in Bengali, at least I can understand enough as well.
Hi, my name is Priyanka, and it's been a wonderful experience watching Manto. I've been very excited about it, and it's been pretty hard for me to construct my question because most of it you've answered already. But my question is, as an actor, we loved you as an actor, and now we see you as a director. But at the same time, when we hear the name Nandita Das, we have this box, and we think about social issues and things like.
My background is of social work. I did my master's in social work and worked with NGOs. I came into acting completely by accident. I never wanted to be an actress. Fire was my first film. And thereon I kept doing a few things. And from in the beginning years, suddenly when people would call me to talk about things and to inaugurate something, I used to think, and especially about social issues, and I used to be really upset with it, and I say, why are they calling me? There are people, I know activists who have done much more work in that field, who would speak about it with much more knowledge, and why are they calling me? And I was uncomfortable with this new actress, activist kind of a hat. And slowly I started realizing that many more platforms were available to me to be able to speak about things that I cared for. And as the gentleman here said that, you have an influence. Whatever, however small, Shah Rukh Khan has a much bigger influence, or Priyanka Chopra has a much bigger. So we are all in the hierarchy of things. All of us have an area of influence. So I started, advocacy also was something that became part of my life, again by accident. Randomly, people would call me for issues that I cared for, and I went and spoke. So image is not something that you want to get trapped in. I don't want to say that, yes, I want to change it. Sometimes filmmakers come to me and say, oh, you should do this film, it's very glamorous, it's going to change your image. As if they're doing me a favor. They feel maybe it's sour grapes or something, maybe she wants to change her image and we'll help her do that. So it's not, they say, how can you not want to do commercial films? Shabana Azmi did it, Smita Patil did it. What's your problem? They almost think, are you allergic to money and success? Like, what's your issue? What is your game plan? And for 22 years, if you've remained the same, they feel, okay, she's just missed the bus. So many people feel bad for me that I didn't do that. I could have been somewhere else, and I could have had probably a greater area of influence maybe. But maybe if I had done all of that, I would have been a different person, and maybe I wouldn't be wanting to do the things that I do today. And film is a very small part of my life. There is a whole lot of other things that I do, which engages me with people, and I work in those fields more privately. So, different people may have images, but I'm not trying to prove it or trying to disprove it. I do the work that I feel I like to do. For me, films has always been and will remain a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. And as long as I can keep telling stories and being part of stories that I feel resonate with my own concerns, I will do that.
Okay, I'd really like to hear a question from up there. Can you shout? Or is there a mic?
Jore bole din.
Hello.
Mic.
ওকে সেটা হচ্ছে যে এমন একটা জায়গায় দাঁড়িয়ে আমরা এখন কথা বলছি, সেটা হচ্ছে বাংলা একাডেমি। যে বাংলা একাডেমি প্রতি বছর আমাদের বই সেন্সর করে, অ্যান্ড এই সেন্সরশিপ নিয়ে আমরা সত্যিকার অর্থে খুব বড়। আমরা যারা লেখালেখি করি সেরকম একটা জায়গায় দাঁড়িয়ে আমরা মাধ্যম নিয়ে কথা বলছি এবং ফ্রিডম অফ স্পিচ নিয়ে কথা বলছি। এটা শুধু আমি আজকে যে শিডিউলটা পেয়েছি, শিডিউলের সবগুলোতে আমার মনে হয়েছে যে আমরা ফ্রিডম নিয়ে অনেক বেশি কনসার্ন এই প্রোগ্রামে। সো আপনার মাধ্যমে এবং এখানে যারা আছে সবাইকে, আমার কোনো প্রশ্ন নেই আসলে, আমি এই বিষয়টাই বলতে যাচ্ছিলাম। বাংলা একাডেমির এই যে সিদ্ধান্ত যে প্রতি বছর নেওয়া হয়, ইনফ্যাক্ট এই বছরও নেওয়া হবে, এটার ব্যাপারে আমাদের আপত্তি রয়েছে এবং সেই আপত্তির জায়গা থেকে আপনার কি বলা আছে?
এটাই বলা আছে যে আমি ইংরেজিতে উত্তরটা দেবো।
প্লিজ।
So I think we live in those contradictions. None of us can claim that we do not have those contradictions. Like someone said, oh, we were in this fancy Cannes festival and this is where Manto, they told me, what would have Manto said? Like you're in such a privileged, huge festival. I said, Manto is not as judgmental as we are. He would have said, fine, go ahead, show it to the world. Dhaka is also important and, Cannes is also important, the person in India, it's a cross. So we live in those times where we are constantly negotiating through these spaces. Banner hobe, censor hobe, or moddhe boshe amra kothao bolbo. We will talk about freedom. it up again and again and again, things will change. As long as we don't keep quiet and don't give up this fight. That's all we have to worry about.
Is there another question up there? Yes. Would someone please pass the mic along?
Good evening. Thank you so much for picking up this sensitive subject. I just want to thank you for this wonderful film. This is very well directed, well acted. আর আমরা তো আপনার ফ্যান, সবসময় আপনার অভিনয়েরও ভক্ত। ওয়ান্ডারফুল একটা ছবি। আমি নিজে অ্যাজ এ লয়ার আমি দেখতে চেয়েছি যে ফ্রিডম অফ স্পিচ কি, ফ্রিডম অফ রাইট কি। সবসময় আপনার ইন্টারভিউ দেখি বা শুনি, জানি যে এরকম একটা ছবি হবে, এরকম একটা আনইউজুয়াল ছবি হবে, যার যা নিজের মতো ইন্টারপ্রিটেশন থাকবে। থ্যাংক ইউ সো মাচ ফর বিং হিয়ার।
Okay, this question up front. Mike.
ধন্যবাদ, আমি বাংলায় বলবো। আর দিওয়ালির দিনগুলোতে বাংলাদেশে আসার জন্য আপনাকে অনেক ধন্যবাদ এবং আমরা অনেক আনন্দিত। তো আমি একটা কথা বলবো যে নওয়াজুদ্দিন সিদ্দিকী আপনাকে লেডি মান্টো বলে অভিহিত করেছিলেন এবং আমি মনে করি যে ইউ ডিজার্ভ দ্যাট কমপ্লিমেন্ট। আর আমার প্রশ্নটা হচ্ছে যে আমাদের বাংলার ঋত্বিক ঘটক এবং হচ্ছে মান্টো, এই দুজনের ভিতরে আপনি কি মিল দেখতে পান?
যে মিল আপনি দেখছেন সেটা আমিও দেখতে পাচ্ছি। না, আছে কত সেরকম আছে। Mantoesque people, there are many, right? Writers, filmmakers, because they were deeply troubled. That's why they became alcoholic, you know, and we have just dismissed them as, are o to alcoholic hoye gelo, serokom kichu. So because they had such a deep concern. Ora personal, political, larger kono tofat pele na. It was all one. Everything was personal. And when we take the problems of the world, the more personally we take, the more engaged we will be. If we think of it যে হ্যাঁ ওটা তো ওরা করবে বা হবে যখন দেখবো আমরা, আমি আর কি করতে পারবো, you know, if we have that attitude, then nothing will happen. These people took it very personally and did it through their work. Manto by his writing, Hrithik Ghatak by his films. So yes, I do see the meal, and there are many Mantoesque people around the world. সেরকম প্রচুর আছে
সেটা। এবং আমার মনে হয় যে মান্টো এবং ঋত্বিক এই দুজনকে আমি বলি যে দেশভাগের ক্ষতর সৃষ্টি, মানে একটা পরশ পাথর আমাদের উপর।
ওরা বসে এখন মদ খাচ্ছে আর কথা বলছে, শুনছে সবকিছু।
Is there any question on this side of the room? Okay, this lady, front row.
First of all, I'd like to congratulate you. Wonderful film. And what really struck me is its authenticity. You came from a very pure place, and I think that you also dealt with separation, you know, the schisms that we all face, the struggles that we all face. And the most interesting thing is that we sometimes don't want to face our fears or our struggles or to admit or to work from that. But that is what we grow from. That's what we grow from, and it's a shame that we don't do more of these kinds of films or write more of these books, which are disturbing, because I think you have to start from that place where you feel uncomfortable. My question to you is, what's next?
I wish I knew. I don't know what's next. This is the first time that I might be making an actual conscious choice, because a lot of films are coming now to me, which is a good thing. And it's a good problem to have, because now I have a lot of producers who are approaching me, a lot of scripts that are coming, and that's why I want to make sure that I pick the right one. And but I'm in no hurry. I have nothing to prove. Just let's see where it goes. I have a child who has been neglected through all this journey, of making the film. I've edited with him in my lab and taken him to the shoot with 45 degrees heat to the small village in Gujarat. So I want to spend some time. I also want to write about this journey, because there are many stories that were behind the camera, some of which I'm sharing today, but there are many other stories, very personal stories, and more, because this, for me, this whole experience of making Manto, these 6 years have been at 4 levels. There's one creative journey, there's an emotional journey, there's a socio-political journey, and there's a spiritual journey. And I want to be able to, and they're all coming together. It's not so sort of stratified in the way I'm saying it, So I want to be able to write something about it, but I don't know. But I'll definitely do a film and it won't be a 10-year gap, that much I can assure you. And next time maybe I'll act in that film.
Okay, just one there at the back over there near the camera.
We get some water, please. This room temperature. Oh, yes.
I apologize in advance because I got to the session a bit later. So much of what I'm about to ask, if this has been discussed in the session earlier or already, I apologize in advance. So I think in one of Mamoru Hosoda's films, he said, "In the tales of wolves, is the hunters who die." So what he tried to say was that the story or the fact that the writers or the storytellers are trying to capture, it actually depends on who's telling it. So while the film Manto is actually about Manto, it's also very much about how Nandita Das sees Manto. And all the storytellers, like filmmakers, writers, they are all trying to rise above their subjectivity and to capture their subject. But there is only so much we can do because we are humans too. So my question to you is, as a storyteller, where would you say is that acceptable margin where the subject and the storytellers and how the storyteller sees it is fine to express?
Yeah, it's very interesting what you're asking. One, I think that subjectivity is bound to happen. There's no way, I can only think like myself, right? Manto also says that. When the boy in that hall, he says that, your stories are so depressing and nihilistic, people would want to die, want to kill themselves, would want to commit suicide. And he says, yeah, if your name is Ansar, Shabnam and whatever that is, because you only speak only about yourself, you don't know how others feel. So everything is subjective. That's why I said the film is what it is, good, bad, ugly. When you respond to the film and tell me different things, you're actually telling me more about yourself. And therefore, the film that I have made, of course, it's my interpretation, my perspective. And there are people who know me well, they come out and say, this film is as much about you as it's about Manto. I don't know what they mean, but they know me and they feel like, okay, there's a lot of her in it. And you do it unconsciously. You try and be as objective as you can, because you after all want to tell a story, you've researched, you're taking it based on real facts, and yet your interpretation comes in. So I'm not shying away from that. Even the same script, if it was made by 4 different directors, it would have been different.
Yep.
Manto's subject in itself, if different people make it, it would be different. So I think there's no reason to shy away from that. And there was something at the end you said, sorry, I forgot. Did he say something about...
Like, as a storyteller, where would you find that acceptable margin? This is the subject and that's how I see him or her.
Yeah, but it's not a science. You see, film is not a science. It's an alchemy. It is, why do we consider it as an art? Because you can't say this much, I'll take 50% of this and 50% of that. You can't do that. So it just sort of organically, it is, I've tried to be as objective as I can, knowing that it is subjective. If you know what I mean. That's the paradox of it all.
If I may just ask an add-on question in it.
I know what you're getting at. It triggered in my mind as well when he said.
Because there is another recent film that was made while you were making your film. There was also somebody in Pakistan who was making another film on Manto.
Yes.
So what are the differences between his approach, your approach, and what made your approach pertinent to you?
I started in 2012, only when the film was made. In 2015, when I had gone to Lahore, that's when I met Sarmad Khusat, an actor who plays Manto and directed the film. He said he was also making a film on Manto. And I actually felt really happy that more the merrier, because they're all different perspectives and they will be very different films in their treatment and what they choose to tell and what they choose not to tell. Also, his period is the last 3 years. In fact, after my film finishes, 52 to 55. So it's very different. I've only seen the trailer and now maybe I will see it, but I didn't want to see the film while I was working on it, just subconsciously if it impacts. But I did sessions on Manto with him, We did a session in Lahore, we did a session in Delhi to talk about, what is my Manto kind of versus your Manto. Also the interesting thing about film, and I say this also as a viewer, not just as a maker, in fact more as a viewer, that sometimes the intention, the invisible intent also reaches. When you say that there was a lot of you, or where did the objectivity, subjectivity went, or the lady here, when you said that it was authentic, how do we understand that intent? And I found that magical. Like sometimes I've seen a film about, let's say, a rape scene, and sometimes it just churns your stomach in the way it's shot. You feel like completely troubled by it. And sometimes it's shot to almost titillate you, right? It's the irony of it. But, I mean, this is like an extreme and a more obvious case. But in some ways, I think इसमें उर्दू में बहुत अच्छा लफ्ज़ है नियत. The intent, somehow the intent does get transferred through this, two-dimensional screen. I don't know how it happens, but we feel it. And I think that's when we make a connection. The film makes a connection with the viewer.
Okay, there's a question. This young girl in the aisle.
শুভ সন্ধ্যা নন্দিতা দিদি, আর আমার দুটো প্রশ্ন আছে। সেটা একটা হচ্ছে মান্টো নিয়ে না, তবে বলিউড নিয়ে।
বলিউড বিষয়ে খুব কম জানি, আপনারা বেশি জানবে, সেজন্য ডিফিকাল্ট কোয়েশ্চেনগুলো জিজ্ঞেস করবেন না।
বলিউডে মেয়েদের উপস্থাপনা যেভাবে করা হয় সেই বিষয়ে মতামত এবং যদি দায়বদ্ধতা থাকে, একটা প্রশ্ন। দ্বিতীয় প্রশ্ন
আবার বলুন সেটা।
দায়বদ্ধতা,
এটা খুব কষ্ট শব্দ, এটাকে একটু ট্রান্সলেট করতে হবে। What is দায়বদ্ধতা? রেসপন্সিবিলিটি, দায়িত্ব।
হ্যাঁ, এই বিষয়। আর দ্বিতীয় প্রশ্ন হচ্ছে, মান্টো করতে গিয়ে কি কখনো তসলিমা নাসরিনের কথা মনে হয়েছে? আরেকটা বিষয় জানতে চাই, আমরা যারা প্রশ্ন না, যা আমি উৎসাহ চাচ্ছি আপনার কাছ থেকে, যারা আমরা ক্যামেরার পেছনে কাজ করার স্বপ্ন দেখছি আমার মতো, তাদের জন্য কিছু আজকে যদি বলেন। Thank you.
In terms of responsibility, আমাদের সবার আছে responsibility, right? As human beings, we all need to have that sense of social conscience. But we cannot tell each other. আমি বলতে পারি না যে, you're so young, you're a student. At this stage, it's very difficult for me. Why don't you do this? Or you are a journalist, আপনি এটা লিখছেন না কেন? আমি বলতে পারবো না এটা. And it's not my place to say. We can inspire us, we can suggest to each other, but primarily we are responsible for our acts and responses. But we of course rub off on each other. So I think each one of us needs to be responsible. Those of us who have a deeper sense of social consciousness, whether you tell me or not, it will gnaw at me, it will trouble me, and I will do what I do, or you will do probably more than what I do, and yet I cannot judge you because I don't know what are your compulsions to do or not to do, and vice versa. So I supported a campaign called Dark is Beautiful. At that time, a lot of the interviewers would say that, why don't you tell your film fraternity people to not endorse these whiteness creams? Yeah. So I said, well, I know prochur taka ache in that work, and I'm not judging it. They have their own reasons, and I would talk about it. And I wish, the filmmakers or film actors wouldn't endorse, because do they know that how it impacts the self-esteem of young men and women, especially young girls? Through this campaign, I've got to hear so many horror stories that I couldn't imagine that this issue could even be a standalone issue. So, but it's not my place to tell X, Y, and Z saying, do not endorse this. Through our work, if it moves others and they choose not to, that's good enough. But let's point all our fingers to our own selves. That's the second question she said about Taslima Nasreen. Again, I say this film Manto is only a conduit. He's only a means. There are many Mantos in various genders, shapes and sizes, dead and alive, different languages. They exist, and we have lost one Manto, but we have to support the Mantos that are there today.
Second row.
And sorry, one more you said, what can I tell young, sorry, last or not, tinte proshno chilo, bhule gelam. what can I tell young people? হ্যাঁ এটার পরে একটু ছোট্ট আনসার দেবো আমি লম্বা লম্বা আনসার দিয়ে আমি জানি একটু meandering কিন্তু জীবনটা এরকম না it's not so black and white and sound bites just believe in yourself and be wise about what you dream for and let's all build our social conscience wherever we are let's push it more okay বলুন দাদা কোথায় আপনি
আমার যেটা জানবার সেটা হচ্ছে যে আমি কোন
for the film and I didn't do production because I thought if I say initiatives it can do many other things maybe we'll do a choto DLF at some point as part of the initiative who knows so there is HP Hewlett Packard jera filmer songe kono oder connection nei but they've been official sponsors in Cannes and I've known them for years so because it was about a writer and their tagline is power of the ink they decided to produce this this is probably going to be the only film. I don't know if they're planning to do more films. Viacom ache, arekta notun company film stock bole. This is their first film. So 4 of us together produced this film. Those 3 were investors and I brought in the whole project together including actors, crew and many other things. Viacom, yes, the big producers, they look at it, unfortunately I would say, as a prestige project. Je kane jabe, কিছু অ্যাওয়ার্ডস পাবে but it's a niche film ওরা সব সময় সেটা বলে it's a niche film ছোট একটা ডিস্ট্রিবিউট করব most people don't want to see films like this and maybe it's true maybe I'm living in some illusion and I really wanted to make it much more accessible than it was but they just and when the big Bollywood films come these kind of films get killed because it's all about screen time it's a nexus between exhibitors distributors producers and there's very little as a filmmaker that you can do. The good thing is that one of the big digital platforms will take it up and people will watch it on their device. Amra je eto detail kaj korechi amader production design ba performance and it's a whole different experience to see it on a big screen. And এটা তো Blu-ray যখন আপনারা যান theater then you see even a better quality because it's a DCP which is far more crisp. But that's a I'm not a purist. আগে আমার খুব ইচ্ছে ছিল যে সবাই খালি থিয়েটারে দেখবে but now I'm saying watch it wherever you can let this story reach the people
okay the lady in the second row please
change my mind
you've changed your mind
can you hear me can everybody hear me
yes
I see so yeah I'm an admirer of Manto and writers of that era the writers who wrote in Urdu in 1947 was Prem Chandra and Kuratula and Isma Chugtai, they were all the same group. But here, I just wanted a comment from you. Didn't you find similarity in Manto's writings? Because he also wrote a story called Kali Sharwar. So was he very kind of obsessed with women as sex workers? Because a lot of the stories have empathy for women in that profession.
Yes, because...
Was that the reason that he picked those characters? Or was it because his association with them was very close?
No, I mean that's the accusations, We also always conclude...
No, I'm not saying it as an accusation, no.
Sure. No, but I think he lived, where he lived in Bombay, Forest Road, where he lived, the red light area was very close to him. And he talks about it. If you see the Irani cafe scene, he talks about the fact that how these women would go with all these vile men. And he was sort of very troubled by that. And what are their lives and what are they thinking? And this was, again, fact and fiction merging. So I don't know whether he was obsessed because he's also written about tangawalas, he's written about pimps, he's written about local gundas, he's written about various people, especially partition stories. He's written a host of, and someone who's written 300 short stories and in 20 or 25 years of his life, it's a lot. But I think he was very troubled by the fact that sex workers were viewed with so much of sort of moral high-handedness, and that troubled him. He was a contrarian of sorts, and if you said this was really bad, that's the thing he would want to write most about. He was just, he wanted to constantly prove you wrong. That was, he had that was his wit also, and He wanted to he liked to poke a finger in the eye of any kind of orthodoxy or any kind of preconceived notion, and I think that intrigued him. And that's why he says, we have the freedom to, the men have the freedom to go there, but we don't have the freedom to write about it. Why? There's hypocrisy. And hypocrisy is also something that he deals with and talks about, especially in his essays.
Okay, I'm going to take one last question. I think that guy's had his hand up for a very long time.
I'm glad I'm not doing this work.
Okay, one last question. Yes.
I would like to congratulate you because this film for sure has so many achievements and accomplishments, but I'm pretty much impressed with two among others. Firstly, that telling story of Manto through so many of Manto's stories, so story within stories. And secondly, bringing out in the courtroom sequence, bringing out the literary debate, apart from the issue of obscenity, which he was accused of, but the standard of literature, the debate between Faiz Ahmed Faiz and Manto, and that the directness, the boldness is a kind of, it derogates the quality of literature. And I really would like to thank you for that. And in Bangladesh, of course, Manto is a less read author. But whenever personally I saw this film, a Bangladeshi character, partly relevant with partition, Qazi Nazrul Islam, resonated my mind so strongly. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was not a question, but we are out of time. Nandita is here, and maybe if you...
Well, now I have to rush back, so I would request you to let me go because my son is waiting for a long time. But I'll be back tomorrow morning. We are talking about issues of women and representation of women in the industry with Manisha Koirala, and Sadaf is going to moderate that session.
So maybe you can catch her while she's rushing between panels or something. Thank you so much.